Chapter 11. Roll Call. The next day, at roll call, several prisoners complimented the girls of Barrack 7 on our nice clothing. It thrilled me to see everyone look so happy. Officer Schmidt made us all stand at attention for longer than usual. It was drizzling rain, and we each stood rigidly. My feet ached from the damp. The rain didn't bother Officer Schmidt, though. A soldier scampered behind him as he walked, holding a huge black umbrella over his head. My new blue dress was soaked through, and every bone in my body ached. I was looking forward to drying out in the laundry. Officer Schmidt walked up and down our rows, examining each of us carefully, making note of the new patchwork. When he got to Xenia, he stopped. "Your dress. Where did you get it?" Xenia lowered her eyes and looked at her muddy feet. "A friend gave it to me." He grunted. He continued his inspection. When he got to me, he stopped again. "Nice dress, little seamstress," he said. "That one shirt went far. Why didn't you keep the whole thing for yourself?" My mouth refused to form words. Officer Schmidt continued to stand in front of me. "Speak up," he said. "It makes me happy to share," I blurted. And then the officer did something that shocked me. He smiled. He rested one finger on my shoulder and said, "You were getting a bit too comfortable in the laundry. You have a new assignment." He reached into the depths of his uniform jacket and pulled out an Austrobeater identification paper. He handed it to me, saying, "Today, you go on the train. You will need this." It was the first time I had seen my own identification papers. I knew from the other girls that we were supposed to have them with us at all times if we left the compound. Getting caught without papers could mean death. Since I had always worked inside the complex itself, Officer Schmidt had never given me my OST paper to me before. I folded the paper quickly and slipped it into my dress pocket to keep it relatively dry. I was devastated that he was moving me, and he treated me well now, and it was so pleasant in the laundry. To go into the city was something I dreaded. It was bombed regularly after all. Officer Schmidt read out a list of newly reassigned laborers, including Xenia, and told us that the policemen on the train would have the listing of our new jobs. A whistle shrilled as the train approached the gates. "You are dismissed," shouted Officer Schmidt. I stood in the long lineup to get on the train. There were 2 policemen under a lamp post at the gate. One ticked off people's names on his clipboard as they passed him. The other stood with a rifle, casually leaning against his shoulder. When it was my turn, the policeman's brow crinkled. "You've not traveled to work before. What is your name?" "Lida Ferenczuk." I took out my identification paper and showed it to him. He scanned the list of names on his clipboard. "Ah," he said. He pointed to a train car that was 4 units down. "That's the one for you." I walked along a well-used path beside the tracks until I got to the correct train car. I was expecting it to be a cattle car like the one we arrived in, but this car had 2 rows of wooden benches and an aisle down the middle. Most of the seats had already been taken, and as I looked around for a place to sit, I was surprised to see regular people in the car. A gray-haired civilian with his coat unbuttoned, revealing paint-splattered overalls, a plain-looking woman with her hair twisted in a bun, wearing a feathered green hat that looked like it was meant for someone else. Beside her sat a young girl whose blonde curls spilled out over her blue sweater. That girl reminded me so much of Larissa that I had to look away before I began to weep. "Lena, here!" Xenia's voice. I scanned the car. There she was, sitting near the back by herself. Across the aisle from her sat Katerina and Natalia from our barracks. Mary, the schoolgirl I had thought was a teacher, sat in front of her with an older laborer whose name I didn't know. I made my way down the aisle and sat beside Xenia, setting my bowl, cup, and spoon on my lap. After having an assignment away from the others for so long, it was a nice change to be with some people I knew. And of all the girls in my barrack, I like Xenia the best. "We'll be together," I said. "Won't that be wonderful?" Xenia regarded me, one brow arched. "There's no such thing as wonderful here." "You're right, Xenia, but I am still looking forward to working with you." "Yes, that is a good thing. Let's just hope our new jobs aren't too difficult." The last to get to the compartments were two policemen. One of them stepped inside and slid the door shut, and the policeman outside bolted it. The train shuddered and screeched, and soon we were speeding away. I watched out the window, hungry for a view of something that wasn't surrounded by barbed wire. The train stopped at stations along the way, and I watched through the window as policemen with clipboards would approach the train. The laborers would be herded out, and a policeman from the train would give a sheet of paper to a policeman at the station, who clipped it to the board and checked off the workers one by one. Some of them were loaded into the backs of trucks, and others walked in single file, led by a German in civilian clothing. Xenia had been traveling this route for some time. "Who are those people taking the laborers away?" I asked her. "Factory owners, quarry managers, business owners," she replied. "I thought we were forced workers for the Nazis. These businessmen pay the government for the privilege of using us," replied Xenia bitterly. "I'm sure they find it quite a convenience to have slaves." Her comment made me wonder what these regular Germans thought about us. Did they think we had done something wrong and were being punished? Or did they even know that their government captured people from other countries and made them work for Germany? As our train idled at a later stop, we watched as a cluster of near-dead men who wore yellow stars on their striped rags were forced into the back of a truck by a soldier with a club. We were being treated terribly, but one glance told us that these Jewish people had it even worse. Were they fed at all? I was grateful that no one at the camp realized that Xenia was Jewish. I glanced at her now and saw that her eyes had a faraway look. Was she thinking of her dead parents? A shiver ran down my back as if someone had stepped on my grave. Our stop was the last. The whole time I had been on the train, I hadn't heard the sound of bomber planes overhead. It wasn't because they had stopped, but because the train chugging was so loud. As soon as I stepped outside, the familiar high-pitched whine of American bombs was all I could hear. The ground trembled when one hit, and I could see a puff of smoke in the near distance. It didn't matter how often I heard bombs, I could never get used to them. I stepped in line behind Mary and waited to be processed. The sun was shining over the top of a mountain range in the distance. These sharp gray rocks were nothing like our mountains back home. Ours had gentle rolling slopes covered with trees and grass. These jutted up into the heavens like weapons. As I waited in line, I felt the folded ridges of my identification papers in my pocket. I could not lose this. I pulled it out, and for the first time took a good look at the photograph. Was that really me? It was less than a year ago, but I looked so young and innocent. Aside from the whip slash on my face and the shaved head and the bug bites, I had looked almost healthy. I put my hand up to my cheekbone, where the cut had been. The wound had never closed over, but the skin was so thin. The wound had closed over, but the skin was so thin that I could feel each of my teeth. I put my hand up to my hair. It was longer now, but standing up in tufts. Washing it with a harsh bleaching powder and cold water was essential to keep the lice away, but it burned my scalp and matted my hair. The paper was snatched out of my hand. I looked up. The policeman. You are Lena Fierzuk? I nodded. He found my name on his list and put a check mark beside it. You go over there to Fürzanger, he said, pointing with his pencil to a woman in a tailored blue suit. I tried not to stare at her, but it was hard not to. First of all, the only other women at the train station were either frumpy-looking mothers with children or slave laborers. I could tell by the cut of this woman's suit that it was custom-made to show off her narrow waist. The material was expensive. I suspected it was a fine woven wool from England. Mama once had a customer who got her clothing from England, and she would bring it in to us for alterations. Fürzanger's outfit reminded me of that woman's. The policeman showed the woman his clipboard, and together they ran through our names. Katerina, Xenia, Mary, Natalia, a woman I didn't recognize named Bibi, and me. Very good, Fürzanger said in German, but with an unfamiliar accent. And you're sure these all have steady hands? The policeman flipped through the pages in his clipboard. He pointed to one name. They both looked at Xenia, who had removed the bandages on her arm, but the scratches were still vivid. I don't know why they gave you one who is injured. If she's not any good, I'll just get rid of her. Yes, ma'am. I do know that these 6 were all hand-selected for you. Should I load them up? Yes, Hans. I'll meet you at the factory. She walked up to a long black car that was idling beside the station building. A uniformed man jumped out of the driver's seat and ran to the back door on the opposite side, opening it wide just as she got to it. He closed her door once she stepped in. Then he got back in and sped away. The policeman loaded the 6 of us into the open back of a pickup truck. The truck bed was wet with rain, and there were no benches, so we had no choice but to sit down in the puddles. We huddled together with Xenia in the middle to keep her from falling on her scratches as we were driven away from the station. What had we been hand-selected for?